Welcome back, everybody, to another SaaS Connect 101 online. We have a really great topic today. The best SaaS partnership strategy you could possibly have is start from day one, build your product around the API, and just go straight to partnerships from the beginning. We have two of the top minds, honestly, in this industry who've done this with their companies. Christian Owens, CEO of Paddle, one of the biggest payment processing frameworks out there on the internet, and Tim Metzner, co-founder of Coterie, who's taken the insurance industry and turned that mess into something beautiful through their API and bringing that to market. Something I know a little bit about. Legacy insurance is a wild space, for sure. I'd like to remind everyone how these things go. We are the Cloud Software Association. I'm the president, and you can join for free. We're the SaaS Partnership Network. That's cloudsoftwareassociation.com. We have a thriving Slack community and events like this. For those of us who are executive members who want to do greater professional development for themselves and become paid members, after this, we have the Speakers Lounge to talk directly with Tim and Christian to help you level up your own personal strategies. And we'll have that afterwards. But meanwhile, these talks are live. I mean, fire your questions along the way. We're here to help you. So, we have something to talk about, but ask your questions and we will get to them. So with that, I did an introduction for you, but it's great to hear your stories from your point of view. Tim, I'll start with you. Tell me a little bit about yourself and Coterie and what it is.
Yeah, I'll give super quick background first. So serial entrepreneur, I always tell people I've never had a real job, quote unquote, because I've always been a part of starting companies. So for good and for bad, that's just sort of how I'm wired, is to start things. My background before Coterie, before getting into insurance, was in technology. So every company I've been a part of starting has been a technology company. And I've worn just about every hat you can wear in a tech company other than engineer. So I've done it all throughout the years, and sort of through kind of my body of experiences, had some pretty, decent successes, but was really excited to take kind of a bigger swing, really build a great product company. And the couple categories I had sort of circled and said, if I had a chance to build a company, and those I'd jump at it were healthcare and insurance. Two companies sorely in need of technology, innovation or disruption, if you want to call it that. And so the idea for me was, if I could find a domain expert who really understood that space and was aligned with a vision for bringing a tech and data first approach to it, that would be a ton of fun. So that was sort of my background, what led me to Coterie. And the quick overview of what we're doing at Coterie is we're focused entirely on the commercial, so the business insurance space rather than the personal line space. And we're really looking at an industry that is about as antiquated as they come still, in terms of, things still being done by paper and manual processes, and, really slow and kind of slow to adopt technology, and saying, what if we start and build a company from the ground up with the thought that, let's use technology at the very beginning, right? And so we obviously talk about API as a distribution mechanism, but for us, the idea is pretty simple. We want to make business insurance easy for an entrepreneur to get, a business owner to get, regardless of where they want to get it. Whether they have a trusted relationship with an agent or broker already, and they just want it to be super easy to get from them, or whether they're a user of a platform like QuickBooks and they're running their accounting on there, and there's now an insurance button that we're powering that just makes it super easy to do there. Our belief is insurance is not something anyone wants to figure out or spend a bunch of time on. So let's make it as simple as we possibly can. So that's the super quick overview of what we're doing.
And because it's API centric, and this is the network of SaaS companies, partnership teams, the promise of Coterie to them is what can they do with Coterie in their own products?
Yeah, so we extend capability for them to offer insurance to their members. So, if you're a platform that is trying to increasingly provide all kinds of services to a small business owner, insurance for some people is a really relevant part of that ecosystem. And so for us, we can say, hey, rather than a link out to someone to go find insurance, or not even tackling it all, what if we just built a fully integrated experience where you could buy a policy, see your policy docs, and even manage your insurance right from the platform that you already trust and have a relationship with? How much more might that simplify your life? So for our partners, which really are sort of our customers now, right? Our platform partners, it increases their customer lifetime value, because it's another sticky thing, right? Insurance is an annual renewable thing that you have to do every single year. And if that's yet another thing I'm relying on the partner to get for me and to manage for me, even less likely for me to jump ship and go to another competitor. So, in addition to, it's also a potential new stream of revenue for our partners, right? Like being able to be a part of the sort of insurance action, so to speak, is also pretty interesting.
Amazing. There's a lot of points in there that we should get to. Is your partners, your customers. We'll get to that afterwards. But Christian, Paddle, I'm a huge fan of Paddle, of course, hopefully soon to be a customer of yours as well when I'm at AppBind. So tell us all about what Paddle is and, how powerful the system really is.
Yeah, so following on from the trend from Tim, I'll give a little bit of my background because I think it's helpful kind of color for the story. So I equally have also never had a real job. I dropped out of school when I was 16 and started building my first software company about then. Self-taught kind of engineer and started building kind of SaaS products about then. And that's really when I ran into the kind of challenge that we now try and solve at Paddle, and was really kind of the genesis of the idea, which was we were building that SaaS company when I was sort of pretty young, and we scaled it to a reasonable size. We've grown it to like sort of 5-6 million in revenue over about 18 months, which sort of, I don't know quite how we did it, but we managed it. And then we were basically faced with this situation where we were dealing with all of this other stuff that wasn't building the product or talking to customers or kind of any of that fun stuff that people enjoy doing. We were trying to deal with, okay, like how do we take recurring payments and how do we do this internationally? How do we deal with sales taxes and compliance and optimizing kind of checkout conversion and dealing with different currencies and sort of all of this sort of mishmash of stuff that you kind of just have to figure out, and sort of becomes more complex as you scale and as you go international and things like that. And really the kind of how Paddle came about was sort of really just went in search of trying to buy something to solve this problem, and then realized that I couldn't buy one thing to solve this problem. I had to buy 6. And sort of 3 or 4 of those things were pretty manual. And then all of the stuff between those things were forms that I had to fill out, or governments that I had to go and deal with from a tax perspective, or really old banking services to figure out how we take different currencies and things like that. So really the base of the idea of like, how do we wrap up all of these different things that every SaaS business encounters around taking payments, dealing with currencies, sort of recurring billing, invoicing, going international, sort of all of this stuff, paying taxes in sort of every country that you sell in. How do we take all of this stuff, wrap it into one product? And sort of for us, the natural way to do that was build it into one product and then offer it as a set of APIs to SaaS and software companies so that they could integrate kind of this seamlessly directly into their products and how they run their businesses. And that's really how the idea came about. We started in 2012, really just trying to scratch our own itch more than anything else. And then kind of has morphed into sort of what it is today.
Both of you have like pretty interesting elements of the story, is that you're wrapping legacy industries up. So, I mean, you're mentioning, Christian, like tax, compliance, payments, these kind of things. And you had to cobble together a bunch of legacy systems at your other company. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then Tim, same with insurance carriers. I mean, I worked briefly in that industry. It is a joy to work with there. I have emailed PDFs. I've emailed scanned images of JPEGs, which doesn't make any sense if you think about that, what that means, what I just said with my mouth. It's like, it's already an image file and I have to scan it in. Yes, because we have to fax it and then scan it. Okay. You got to fax it. Okay. I've seen everything.
The best is a PDF that you sign digitally and then print out and then mail. Because that cuts a bunch of steps out that you would otherwise have.
Oh, I have so many feelings about PDF flows. I'm looking at you. CDW drives me nuts, that company. Okay. Anyway, so this is what you're faced with, right? So both of you, like the instinct, tell me, like it was obvious in the beginning was an API, or did you start with a human interface first? Like where did you begin?
So I can go first. So we started with an API. I think this was made much easier for us, just on the basis that all of our customers are software companies. So we were really kind of working backwards from the end solution that we wanted, which was, why on earth do I have to register for sales tax in this place and file a tax return and do all that stuff? I'd really love it if I could just plug something in that did all that for me, or even better, didn't have to even plug anything in, like did, because like typically in the historical way of doing this, you would have 6 APIs. And sort of what we wanted to do is kind of condense that into one. So we were really kind of doing two things. We were wrapping legacy sort of sets of services and infrastructure and things that were already APIs. But the real challenge that you have, and I think probably a lot of people listening to this have experienced it in their own businesses, the real challenge you have is when you have something that's really great that's an API, that you're able to automate 98% of it, but then there's this other process that exists outside of anything that's to do with any type of technology that still requires you to fill out a form and mail it somewhere. And then sort of it's suddenly all of this efficiency, the gain that you're getting out of something being an API sort of gets lost through there being this physical, manual, sort of horrible process that kind of blocks that. So the goal for us was to take a bunch of things that were already APIs, and then how do we take all of those manual legacy things and actually kind of elevate them, I guess, to sort of the same standard as those other APIs that we were kind of using and implementing with.
Yeah, I mean, that's the magic. I mean, same thing in insurance. So give me an example in your case, Christian, of a manual process you guys sorted
out. So like the obvious one I've said a couple of times is like tax returns.
Yeah, okay.
So like we wanted to go from this place where you implement a payment provider, you implement a, I don't know, a recurring billing management thing. Maybe you have another API that you use for fraud management. Or access control or authentication or whatever it is with a product, something that's around billing. And then sort of, you then have like this process that happens of like, you take a payment from somebody and like, then you need to go and do this very manual process off the back of sort of the aggregate set of payments that you've gone and collected from people, which is go and file and pay a tax return, remit the money and kind of do all of that stuff and make sure it all reconciles and things like that. So we were saying like, why isn't the whole process of collecting the tax, filing the tax return and remitting the tax part of that same API call that makes the payment? Because you have all the same information that you require in order to understand the tax liability of a transaction and kind of go and make that payment. So that was really kind of what we were trying to do, is take these two reasonably discrete historical workflows. One was, how do I accept someone's money? And the other one was like, how do then I pay a portion of that money in tax? And say like, let's just merge those two things together.
The gem in that story is that the API, it's not just about computers. It's about taking the whole service and system and wrapping it into something that a developer can go, okay, call that, something will happen, I get a result. Because that's how developers think, right? The manual stuff is, nice for the people doing the work, but it has nothing to do with the person who's consuming it as your customers. They just want it to be done. And that is a completely, maybe it's an engineering way of thinking. I mean, that's how I think, systems thinking, but not every product is like this, right? I mean, let's go to insurance, like a lot of the tools that were out there were just better, like form management systems, right? It's still humans, like a lot of brokers on the phone. So part of that you've solved, right, Tim? Like you've taken, how much of the human component of the quoting and binding the terms in insurance have you taken out?
Yeah, like our story, honestly, even though the space is totally different, like, I could change a few words and Christians and it's basically the same pitch, which is like, there are, multiple steps to the process that were historically manual. Over time, insurance companies got a little bit better and were able to digitize at least some of the process, but there's still multiple steps to get anything done. So if you think about like, if a kind of legacy carrier tried to create an API, like it would end up being a series of, I don't know how many different calls in order to actually get a policy to a point where you could bind it. Whereas, today we've combined everything into a single API call. Like you pass the data we need, we pass a price to you, you press buy. Like that's it, right? And so that means we are automating underwriting. Like it's the box is set and there's no human reviewing something. Like we have the engine has been built, right? Like we are going to automatically decide right away whether or not you are in or out of appetite. And if you're in appetite, we're going to capture all the data we need so you can bind, rather than the historical way to do it is like, okay, we'll pre-qualify you. Here's an early quote. You're probably in. We've got like 30 more questions to ask you before we actually can decide whether or not you fit in our box and what the price might be. And so trying to bring that all online and do it with a single API call and do it for a broad, spectrum of small businesses is not an insignificant hurdle to get over. That was sort of the goal of mine. And to your earlier question, like we started API first as well, because we had the channel and kind of the customer experience in mind that we wanted to create. So we knew eventually we would service agents and brokers and create a great tool for them, which we now have. But we actually decided to start in a much harder place, which is like, we thought about a partner, like I use QuickBooks as the example because we're actually working with them. And it's like, what if we could fully embed an insurance experience in a platform like that? What would that look like? And the customer experience that doesn't work there is you ask some questions, we tell you you're probably in, and then like there's a series of phone calls that have to happen in maybe days, if not week, before you actually have a policy and you're done, right? Like we wanted to create that magical customer experience that is in alignment with how most of us experience, the internet today and what we have come to expect, right? It's like, what's the Amazon-like approach to selling insurance? Like, let's target making it that easy. And so that's the experience we had in mind. And that's why we built sort of API first to say, like, if we're going to do that, we need to embed it into places where people already are, rather than try and pull them out of their flow and go to some other place to go figure this thing out.
This is really interesting. Go ahead.
Sorry, I think this is like an interesting point on how people should think about building APIs and the kind of quote unquote like legacy systems that they replace. Of like, you can really, to your point, you can really tell when a business that hasn't been built API first tries to add it later, because it mirrors their internal like organizational structure of how they get stuff done. Of like if an insurance request has to go through a quotation team and then an underwriting team and then a sales team and then a sort of delivery kind of mechanism, like typically when they go and build an API for that, you have every single one of those things that were in the manual process then replicated as a different API or a different touch point in the automated one. And I think it really requires you to almost come at the problem from the end and then work backwards. Like, what outcome are we trying to get to? Because to your point previously, like thinking about inputs and then outputs, like I want to send this thing, I want to get a response, and then I want to do something with the response. And I think that's sort of one of the things that we thought really hard about up front was how do we, like, you can map out the whole process of doing everything that we can do in a single API call in a big flowchart of how it would do it if you do it manually. The goal is not to then go and achieve that same thing with a set of APIs. The goal is to achieve the magical version of that, to use Tim's words, of like, how do you actually just sort of completely abstract away this underlying kind of complexity and work that is happening into something that you've made incredibly simple.
Can I push on that though for a minute though? Because there's sort of, there's conflicting points of view, at least in startup land, right? Which is, common advice is don't try and boil the ocean out of the gate, right? Like you could look at this massive complex process and go like, man, we could create this incredible new magic solution that would solve this whole thing. And you might spend a year or two trying to get to that beautiful end state. Another approach is you pick a part of that and you automate one piece of it and you sort of work your way up to that. I think there's like sort of pros and cons of both approaches, but I'm curious, like your approach, Christian, sounds like we knew we had to do a bunch of this, if not all of this out of the gate to actually get to a point where we have a relevant sort of like our MVP is not very because there's a lot of stuff wrapped up in this, but how did you think about that or approach it, or did you try and sort of tackle it all initially?
Yeah. So for us, it was I think there are a couple of ways of approaching kind of it. And I think there's nothing wrong with either approach. There's nothing wrong with the approach of saying we want to go and make the best, in your instance, like we want to go and make the best possible kind of API for underwriting versus the best possible API for insurance. But I think the nuance there is like, who is the customer of this thing? And And like you might sell the best API in the world for underwriting to other insurance companies, but you're probably not going to sell it to a business that's going to go and buy insurance. And I think the same thing was true for us. But it kind of took a slightly different turn with us of like, it was a vertical focus thing for us. So it was rather than saying, in our instance, rather than saying, how can we go and solve taxes for everyone? It was, how can we go and solve selling software for specifically software businesses? Like, it wouldn't have made sense for us to go and say, how can we go and solve taxes for software businesses? Because the market isn't big enough. Like, we'd end up becoming a commodity in a really small marketplace. Whereas, so actually, when you want to go and solve that problem, it becomes actually just like a part of a bigger problem that needs to be solved. And then how do you solve all the adjacencies to that thing that immediately kind of touch it? So that's, I think, how we thought about it is sort of, we wanted to do something really specific for a specific set of people. And that probably, unfortunately, in the beginning, fortunately now, led to a point where our MVP couldn't be very M. Like, we had to go and solve the full problem.
So there's two sides of this story that are kind of interesting. I want to touch on one before we get to the other one, which I think is probably more interesting. But like, well, part of it, you're selling to your legacy companies who are basically your suppliers that you're wrapping in the APIs. And like you said, they need to reorganize their company to fix the API for them. They won't. You're basically redesigning their process. You need to convince them, to let you basically take them to market the way you want them to. Was there pushback from them? Or if there wasn't, how did you convince them to say, you know what, it's great what you're doing, we can do it better, let us do it for you? How did you, so Tim, like insurance companies, I think there's a lot of risk involved in letting anyone take them to market. So they must have said something to you. So how do you get through that?
Yeah, no, it's a good point, because what we didn't do is build a full stack insurance company out of the gate. Like, that's not what we are today. So we are leveraging existing insurance, underwriting. And it took significant convincing to find a partner willing to, basically in insurance, they call it give you the pen, like willing to trust you with their appetite to actually go automate this. And, I think the reason it works for us is because our story was not, we're a bunch of engineers that are going to do this entirely different than anyone else has done it. Our story was, we're a bunch of engineers and insurance nerds, and combined, that's what makes us special, is like, we have really strong insurance expertise from people who've been in this space forever and understand the intricacies of it. And that is, in combination with our engineering prowess, like, that's the story we were able to finally get a few of the right people to convince to say, like, all right, we're going to take a ride with you all. We're going to trust you on this one, and, basically let you white label our product. So we have taken insurance paper, we've built our own insurance products on top of someone else's paper. We filed those in states individually. So we are acting like a carrier. We manage the full spectrum of the insurance process, but we needed, established companies with A-rated paper that we could use in order to get to market. And so that it was not an easy task, to say the least.
And what about the pushback about changing the process flow, right? Because there's going to be people who are committed to the way it was, and you're basically saying, is this necessary? Can we clean it up, make it more palatable? So was there pushback around that?
Absolutely. Yeah. We had to, most, 9 out of 10 carriers said, no way. That's just not how it works. Right. And so it took a long time to find that one who's like, I understand your pitch. I believe the world might look different in, several years, and we want to have a bet on this. So like, yes, let's kind of take a ride together. But absolutely, like, most people are not comfortable with, for example, like automating underwriting, like truly automating it using technology and saying like, yeah, we believe all the rules can be written into technology to make the same decisions that traditionally a human would do. So it was, like I said, it was a process to get there.
And then yourself, Christian, like, what was your experience? I mean, payments is a lot of money moving around, tax compliance, a lot of risk sitting around there. It's probably, like you said, people doing things. And then you're like, but nope, we're going to clean it up. What was the response?
Our approach was slightly different. I think there are some similarities as well, because there are certain things that you kind of just have to like brute force a little bit, especially when you're kind of dealing with things that are extremely legacy and deal with paperwork. You end up just having to figure out ways around it. Our approach initially was very much one of like ask for forgiveness rather than permission. It was and like our approach was, hey, payment processor, or hey, kind of like insert other kind of part of the stack, like kind of fraud tooling, whatever. We're just going to become your biggest customer. Like we're gonna sign up. We're going to use the product in the same way that everyone else does. Sort of like the big difference is that we are going to kind of hopefully put more volume through you in terms of the number of API calls that we're buying, or in terms of like fraud checking or whatever it is, or the amount of money that we're putting through you in terms of payments, than anyone else sort of on your platform, because we're going to do it for several thousand other businesses at the same time. And initially everybody was incredibly unenthusiastic about that as an approach. I think the thing, especially when it comes to, and there are a bunch of different like nuanced pieces to this, like the underlying payments thing is quite fortunate because there are a few dozen different providers at scale, like within that industry, and they all pretty much only care about getting more volume because they're all commoditized and sort of they're all working for 10, 20, 30 basis points on volume that's going through them. So actually, if you can tell them a reasonably compelling kind of story about how the fact that you're going to bring them hundreds of millions or billions of dollars more volume, they tend to be willing to have a conversation with you about that, because they know that the next person that you're going to speak to is their rival down the street who they kind of don't want that volume to go to. So there's a lot of, there's some flexibility when you're dealing with like underlying things that are commoditized, because like you can name drop in that process as well. You can say, well, if you don't say yes, we prefer to go with you, but we're going to go with X. And then I think the other side of this are, there is no negotiating with like kind of the state government of a place, or like the country government of a place when it comes to, oh, like we want a different way to deal with taxes. Like, unfortunately, we're not yet, nor probably will we ever be at the scale in order to be able to have those conversations and negotiate a different way of filing a tax return. So in those instances, like we just had to take a pretty like brute force approach of like, how do you take a thing that is fundamentally pretty offline and archaic and get enough automation that we can build ourselves around it, that we can actually scale that as a process and do it tens of thousands of times every single month for thousands of businesses.
Yeah, I love that. A very engineering way of solving really difficult people problems that if you went with a people approach with the human interface, like you said, you probably mirror the human process, which is not really what we want to do. But that actually leads to the next side of the question. So now you're selling, this is the more interesting thing. Now you're selling the product to customers slash, most of us would consider partners, like SaaS companies, if we're integrating with them, that would be a partner. But this is the thing about the API-centric business model. They're not really partners, they're become customers, just like you guys were customers of your underlying providers. Even though you were partners of them, you decided to be a customer. These are now your customers. Like first, is everyone who integrates with you, are some of them partners, like on the consuming of your public API, or are they all customers? Like, are they all paying? How does it work commercially?
So for us, the majority of the people are customers. There are other SaaS businesses consuming kind of the service of kind of recurring billing, kind of merchant of record, sort of all of that kind of whole family of things. Equally, there are people who then want to build, there's like the ecosystem side of partners as well, which is we have a bunch of APIs. If our customer was going to go implement with those APIs, well, someone could act as sort of an intermediary between us and the customer as well, and then go and build something in the middle. They could build analytics tooling, or they could build sort of some other portion of value that maybe we're not going to touch. So we have a handful of those people as well. I think the weird sort of scenario that we get into, because obviously we're consuming APIs as well, and we're fundamentally trying to displace you consuming 7 different APIs for consuming one. And some of those 7 different APIs we're going to replace we're going to build some of this stuff. Some of them are going to become obsolete because actually some of those APIs are actually just to connect other ones of those APIs with each other. And then some of them we're actually going to consume and we're going to become the customers of. So it becomes a very interesting, in these sort of scenarios where we're the consumer of an API, there become these really interesting kind of dynamics that happen where we might be selling to a customer who is currently doing the approach of consuming all 7 of those. And we're selling them the alternative to consume 1, but it's going to mean that one of those underlying APIs is still going to get the business because we're going to be using it in the back end as well. And there's this weird kind of co-opetition kind of thing that happens between those as well. And like my view on that is sort of like that in some instances, and it comes back to this point from earlier, it's like, do you, in Tim's case, do you build the underwriting API or do you build the insurance API? It's sort of like they could very well be a customer of one of those APIs that is building a very discrete part of the process, and in another breath be competing with the same company for the same thing. And the way that we see it is sort of, there's just going to be different use cases for different sets of APIs and different ways to solve a problem. And customers should go and choose whichever one makes sense for them, whether it's us or whether it's the thing that we're technically competing with, but also cooperating with. And on the basis of the use case, they should just choose which one makes sense for them. And I think that's the thing that is, yeah.
The component model basically means you have many products, like effectively. It's not just one product. It's you have multiple product lines, which is, and then you can decompose and then work with your competitors who are also your customers who need things. But this API approach sounds like you're allowed to fit into the use cases in the market rather than having to take us versus them. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and it becomes very us versus them on a like an individual level. Like it may feel like that in an individual deal or scenario, but in a macro sense, it's a very kind of cooperative relationship where everybody can win, but the party that wins is the one that makes the most sense for a given use case or the given scenario.
You have this relationship with Stripe, you mentioned, right? It's like you're like, aren't you their biggest customer or something like that?
Not quite, but we're a large customer of Stripe's in sort of Europe, and like the way that we see that relationship is sort of we work with a ton of different payment providers. So sort of Stripe is one of about 15 that we work with, and we make the decision to route a transaction through Stripe when it makes sense for that individual transaction. So when we think Stripe is going to be the cheapest, or when Stripe is going to be the highest probability of that payment succeeding. So like we have a really great relationship with Stripe. We put hundreds of millions of dollars of volume through Stripe. We pay Stripe millions of dollars a year in fees. But equally, tomorrow we may be in a deal where somebody is considering to roll their own version with Stripe on its own versus use Paddle, and maybe that some of that volume will end up going to Stripe anyway in a reasonably opaque way that the customer doesn't necessarily kind of see or know. But I think it's just a very interesting dynamic that it's a fine line to tread, but at the end of the day, kind of everybody ended up winning.
And Tim, you have a similar relationship with Visa, whom, full disclosure, I worked for briefly on contracts. So that's how I know a little bit of this space. And, I know Ben very well. He's great. So but you guys work together, which surprised me, which is awesome. So tell me how that relationship works.
Yeah, so I mean, there's so many different models in our space that we're working under. In I think every case, our partners truly are our partners in the sense that like they don't pay us to use, to access Coterie or our platform. Like they are a distribution partner for us, right? And that looks different in a lot of different cases. In some cases, we're one of many solutions as part of a platform that is providing small business insurance, and Coterie is one of those solutions. The biggest differentiator for us in those scenarios is like we're going to be the quickest to quote and bind. Like why a platform who has other solutions would bring Coterie in is like, yes, but when we're working with our partners, like if there's an option to get this done right now, like that's way better than it takes several days or whatever to get something done, or there's this email or phone call part of the process that still has to happen because that's how insurance works, so to speak. So we represent this sort of unique way to purchase insurance, even for a platform where there are many other sort of solutions or options at the table. In other cases, like for a partner, like we are the insurance solution for them. And they, if you're not a customer, if you're not a partner whose core business has anything to do with insurance, like it's unlikely you're going to build a big like insurance marketplace and bring a bunch of solutions to the table. You're going to say like, hey, we've got a really easy option for you to take care of the insurance part of running your business. And Coterie's built this embedded experience for us to power it. So, the partnerships can look very different for us, certainly. But the nice part is like we can sort of play in any one of those environments.
Well, talk a little bit about this embedded thing, because I did want to get to this. So part of your sales process, it's not just an API, there's a UX that you can drop in, because insurance is not like a function call. I want this, like payments, I want this much money, give it to me. There's like a whole trust and collection of data, experience. So how far along in the process were you before you realized you need to build an embedded experience? And what is it? And how does it work for a company to say, I'm gonna put this in here?
I mean, we really started with that. We tried to start with like the hardest problem, honestly. It's like, let's build for the hardest scenario, because if we can do that, our thing was like, if we can solve that problem, every other experience we could also do. So let's target that hardest problem first. And the magic end state we were hoping for is like, absolutely, there's going to have to be some UI embedded in our partner's experience to deliver this insurance. But what we don't want to have to do is capture a ton of data from a customer. Like what we want to do is pull the data from a partner system. So if you're a partner who knows, just about all the basic business information about a small business, just pass it to us via our API. And we can now ask one question or two questions instead of 30 and give them a bindable, because in many cases, actually give them a bindable quote or an instant quote without any information, and then capture a bit or two of information. And now it's fully bindable. So that's sort of the magic end state we shot for. And we built, out of the gate was like, we want to be able to fully embed, fully power an insurance buying experience while capturing as little data as possible from the end user, that, the business, the policyholder, because no one likes rekeying information that they've done 30 times already. And there's nothing more frustrating than I'm trying to purchase something within this platform that I know full well already has all this information in this platform. Like, it just doesn't make sense that I would go re-enter it. So that from a user experience standpoint, like that's magical. From an insurance standpoint, it's also magical, because what it does is reduces the risk of like getting wrong, bad information. Like whether it's intentional or not, like the information that's sitting in a system you're using is more accurate than what an agent is going to fill out on a piece of paper as they're trying to write your business for you. And so from an underwriting standpoint, it actually becomes a better risk, because we have more true, more authentic, more real-time data that we're using to underwrite that business.
Christian, you have something similar, right? You have the checkout widget, don't you? And probably a couple other flows. How long did it take you before you built one of those?
It was the first thing that we built.
Oh, really?
So I think in a similar sort of scenario, it was sort of like how do we do, because I think a lot of when you think about like our business, it's a little bit like kind of like an iceberg. There's like all of this stuff below the waterline, which is all the stuff that we've been talking about today. It's like, how do you deal with taxes and all of that stuff? And then there's the little bit that sits on top, which is sort of everybody kind of knows all of the things that they should be doing. It becomes like, what's all the best practice? How do you best kind of like optimize for conversion? How do you best collect people's information to ensure that it's the most accurate that it could be, and it picks up on errors and sort of all that stuff? So we kind of started from that endpoint and said, like, how do we build the best possible way of buying a piece of software? And then we extended that to how do we make it the best possible way to get receipts for a piece of software that you bought? And how do we make it the best possible way to update information about subscription billing information, or change plans to a different plan, or kind of transfer ownership to another person within an organization, or whatever it is. All this stuff that was kind of, everybody was kind of building the same thing as each other over and over again. The same was true for the kind of below the waterline, in the iceberg analogy, kind of infrastructure as well. So we kind of started from the end state and then worked backwards, and then used sort of everything that we learned from that process to build better sets of APIs for people to add customizability and kind of optionality into the process themselves. And that's sort of the approach that we take now to building new stuff as well, it's kind of like start with the out of the box plug and play end state, because we'll collect far more information and learn far more about kind of how we want to go and solve this problem by doing it that way, even if the kind of the layer behind the scenes that we're doing is a little bit janky and a little bit messy, and there are some manual processes that we're kind of filling in, but it's kind of opaque to everybody else. Then lets us kind of build the best APIs and automate as much of that process as we can.
On this theme, the last thing, I'd like to talk about building on this, like what you both said, is one of the interesting things I was reacting to is the hardest possible thing you can get another SaaS company to do is to change their UX to put you directly into the app, right? And the thing that a lot of CEOs don't like is having their customers not on their app. They want them in their user experience. But both of you are component-based from the beginning. The strategy is from the beginning, both of you, which is surprising and awesome. You started with the UX as a widget component to bed in someone else's experience, which is, in my opinion, actually the most powerful thing you could do in partnerships, because not only is it easy, but visible, and people copy each other. So the question Tim, maybe it's actually more pressing for you. I mean, insurance is the scariest thing for someone who doesn't, in payments, I need the money. I'm going to put something in there, but sending my customers to insurance quoting thing, I don't even know what that is. It's not like, if you're into it and like, I don't know anything about insurance, right? Like, how do I trust this? How did you build trust with I'm sure with Intuit, because they were very careful. It was a process. How did you build trust that this was going to be a good experience, an Intuit friendly experience? What did you have to do to make that sale effectively, even though you're their partner, you have to convince them?
Yeah, it's actually a really good point, because while that is sort of that's the ideal end state for us, is like that fully embedded experience. I think what you're saying, and I've experienced this, it's also the hardest to sell. Like convincing someone to actually spend the resources on their end to fully embed you in their flow is not an insignificant ask. And so the thing, we've learned over the last couple of years is you actually have to target partners who already have made some sort of decision that like insurance is a relevant part of their ecosystem. Like if I go into a large SaaS company today and they haven't thought about insurance, like we're probably going to spend a year getting to know each other and like getting them to really get comfortable with Coterie and with who we are. And what I can get pretty quickly is like, I see why this would be relevant and an interesting add to what we're doing. The harder part is like, how do I get you to prioritize that over the 30 things that are a little more closer to core than insurance might be? So I think for us, what we've learned is like, we have to find the champion who's already been spending the last year tilling that soil for us and said like, insurance should be part of what we do, or we've already run some tests in it. We're looking for a better way to do it. So that is, it's not a magic answer. It's like, we actually got to find people who've sort of done the hard work already of saying, we think insurance should be part of this. And when that happens, in most cases, if I can pitch Coterie to them, like that's the exact thing we would love to be able to do. But in talking to every other carrier out there, didn't seem like it was even possible. Like now I know I've got you. Like if you've done a little bit of homework and you've talked to other people, like, and then you get a chance to talk to Coterie, like we went pretty quickly on that. Cause like, yes, that's the right customer experience. Absolutely. They're going to do some vetting and make sure we're legitimate and we have, really strong reinsurance, and like, we're not going to go away so that if a claim happens, like we'll actually, service it. But a big part of it is really that prioritization piece of like, is this actually an interesting enough part of your universe?
And then also like the design considerations, because people are particular about their UX. Do they just melt away once they commit to the idea? Or, I'm sure there's a little bit polished, but like, is that what your experience was?
So I honestly, we just spend a ton of time on like as soon as I possibly can, I get our head of partner experience engaged with their product people, because from day one, we're talking about like, what's the customer experience you want to build? And let me show you how you can leverage the Coterie APIs and what we've already built to enable that. So we're as quickly as possible. I always say like, I want to get the product people talking. If I can get that to happen, like pretty quickly, we can get to a point where like, actually this integration, while insurance is incredibly complex, the integration with Coterie is not. The harder part is building the UI into their platform, right? So I want to start helping them solve that problem as quickly as we can and kind of picturing the end state.
That's a gem of a point. Like get your product people talking upfront, because that is the hardest part of the sale. Once you get past that,
if you get deal people excited and then hand it over to product, like good luck. Like it just will get stalled all day long. Like we've found, like, get those product people engaged early on so that they're part of the solution, not just being handed something that a deal guy has sort of sold and now they're flipping over.
Are you saying we in partnerships aren't as powerful in our organizations as we hope we are?
In some cases.
Is that why we spend so much time drinking with each other when we can? Yeah, maybe November, like I said, we'll get together.
Right.
Christian, Tim, thank you so much for this. There are a lot of gems in here. I'm looking forward to cutting this up and making little snippets, because this is a very deep topic that, but it's the most powerful strategy in partnerships. And, more people understood it, we'd be better off as an industry and as professionals. So thank you again. For those of us who are listening, we're cloudsoftwareassociation.com. For those of us who want to talk to Tim and Christian more directly, who are our executive members, I'll throw the Zoom link in our exec member lounge. I'll talk to you in a couple minutes. Thank you again.
Well, thanks.
Thank you.